I think leadership is such a general term that most people would like to refer to themselves as leaders. Well, I think we have a few characteristics of leadership. We all know who leaders are. A leader will always be somebody that will have impact, that will have some form of influence, that will have wisdom that other people would like to share in. So in one way or another, I think in spite of all the definitions of leadership, it's also dependent on context, it's dependent on the situation. Some people are situational leaders, they rise to the occasion. Some people are so-called born leaders, they will be a leader in nearly every situation or any situation. But in general, I think a leader is somebody with a teachable point of view, someone whose opinions are valued, some opinions are shared, and a leader therefore will have some form of impact, some form of following, some form of relational information that other people would like to share in. And usually you will find a number of people gathering around leaders or following leaders. In the long and the short is it's quite difficult to define leadership, I think, today. But it's usually highly relational and usually linked to values. I think we've become accustomed to the fact that church leadership is directly associated with titles. So what we would have usually in church is that the person with a title, pastor, the father, the professor, or the elder, they would have more authority than people without titles. So in other words, we've come to associate leadership in church with position, which I don't think is correct. I think in the first instance we should be very clear about this, that the church has only one leader, and that is Christ. So we are all followers. And then we could at best be servant leaders. In other words, people commissioned by Christ, summoned to lead by Christ. So I think there's a summons on the lives of some of Christ's people to lead, to teach. And in that sense, it's a call to obedience, it's a call to faith, and it's also a call to serve. Therefore, all leadership in the church, all leadership in the disciple group of Jesus, if we call ourselves faithful followers of Christ, would be servant leadership. Good leaders serve. So I think in general, this would be the big picture that we have to deal with, that true leaders are servants. Like we have in Romans 16, Phoebe, the well-known leader of the church in Kenchria. This lady was called by Paul both a prosthetess. The Greek word means she's a patron, she's the benefactor of the local church in the area of Corinth, and she's also called a diakonos, a servant. So she's the first instance that we have in the New Testament, well, very clear instance of a servant leader. And I think today it's very important to understand this approach to leadership in general. When we get to local churches, of course, God takes care of His church through local leadership. And therefore, in the New Testament times, we have the different roles of leadership, the overseers, we have the elders. Paul uses two Greek terms. He uses the term episkopos and he uses the term presbyteros. He refers to so-called deacons. And we probably have other leadership functions, but those would not be positions in the first instance, or certain, it would be positions from where to serve, but it wouldn't be like professional positions like it's become today. To Paul, elders firstly had to be people of character. The character of a leader in the New Testament is more important than what the leader does. The leader presents Christ and through his or her character reveals the identity of Christ. And then it's also the responsibility of leaders in the New Testament and various churches to take care of God's flock. They have to know the wolves that threaten God's flock. They also have to take care of protecting the flock against intruders, heresies, heretics, and to lead people in the truth of God's word. In church, it's become a custom that if you want to serve God in a very special manner or in a full-time capacity, that you have to join a local church and be a local church leader. I think we should be clear about this in terms of Christian leadership, that not all relevant or all valid forms of leadership should be expressed via the local church only. Of course, it's very important. The local church, to a certain extent, is the hope of the world. But Christ plays in 10,000 places. Therefore, leadership is also about serving God in the kingdom. I think we've made a false distinction between full-time and part-time leadership. In every place where Christ's disciples are, they have the responsibility to be leaders. This will imply being leaders in so-called para-church movements, missionary movements, serving some forms of movement where you serve the poor, the needy, but also in so-called secular positions where Christians find themselves. They have to exercise leadership. They have to live to honor God and work to honor God. So leadership is much more than just local church leadership. The character of the leader is much more important, according to the New Testament, than the functions of a leader. Usually we make the mistake of not discerning the differences between talent and character formation. Usually, as one American author would say, we hire for talent in the church and we fire on character. It should have been otherwise. Talent is the natural gifts that people have. The gift to speak, the gift to communicate, the gift to do administration. Some people have a very strong gift of leading and organization, etc. But there's always a sell-by date on talent, as we know. Talent never lasts forever. Character never has a sell-by date. But character is never as popular as talent. God expects character. And the first aspect of character that the New Testament and the Old Testament would require is a godly life. Therefore, Paul, when he instructs Timothy, he would tell him that a servant of God is not always involved in brawls and in fights and in debates. We should be known through our sober lives, our love for God, our love for others. So a spiritual leader should spend much time in the presence of God so that God can shape his or her soul, her identity, so that we can learn humility. One of the strongest New Testament and Old Testament character traits that God expects of us would be humility. So God wants humble leaders, leaders that serve at the table, as Luke 17 verse 7 to 10 would tell us. So character formation is crucial in the life of a spiritual leader. Character is always a relational, interactive route with God. We have to grow from, as Paul says in 2 Corinthians 3 verse 18, from glory to glory. We, in our own journey with Christ, our character is formed. And it's a constant journey. Sometimes we experience that we are not there where Christ wants us to be, but the true leader will work from his or her own weaknesses and give that to Christ. I think we should be clear about the fact that true spiritual leaders are not like spiritual supermen or superwomen. We are, like Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12, very much aware of our weaknesses. But it never becomes an excuse. We never hide behind our weaknesses. Then it could become a so-called virtue. We grow from our weaknesses. We learn from our weaknesses. And true spiritual leaders also share their own struggles a bit. Some people know that's not always easy for them. Sometimes they get angry, sometimes they lose hope, sometimes they're downtrodden. Paul did this, he shared his heart in 2 Corinthians 4. But a true spiritual leader has a strong prayer life, has a vibrant Bible study life, spends time with people as mentors. He or she is allowed to be mentored. They have a teachable spirit. So in that sense, true leaders are learners. They are always growing in terms of knowledge, wisdom. They learn from others, they learn from God, they're book readers, they love to read, they love to study. Of course, it's always important for a leader to study and to work hard. Without proper knowledge, we can never grow. We need information. We need creative information. Therefore, it's one of the routes that church leaders took throughout the centuries was to study. We know of all the early church fathers, they spent their whole life studying the Word of God. Nowadays, it usually means that you have to have a degree or a diploma. That's not the prerequisite. Let's be very clear on this. Jesus is not impressed by one's papers, one's qualifications, one's titles. Jesus is on record in Matthew 23 that the learned rabbis of his day, the scribes and the Pharisees, that they had their chance. God is not impressed by their titles, by their demeanor, by the fact that they go around and everybody addresses them on their titles. Jesus really does not like that. He says we have one God and one Father. So the one thing that we need to understand is that although it's extremely important, and I'm also always telling leaders to keep on studying, to study, but if that is for the sake of acquiring titles and trying to raise your own levels of honor in society due to all your titles, you're doing it for the wrong reason. Then you need humility. Paul warns the Corinthians, knowledge puffs up. So a leader should be very clear, and therefore a good leader needs a good mentor or a few good mentors that will help you when you start studying to keep your ego intact, to do it for the right reasons. So I would always say, tell leaders, study, work hard, get as many qualifications that you can. But always remember, do it for the glory of God. Otherwise, don't do it. I think it's the difficult thing that we all have to face up to, and this is the challenge of leadership. A leader must always inspire. We've been called to lead and to serve, but to intentionally live the life of Christ. So the first thing that usually happens to most followers is that they lull into a comfort zone. So they find a little religious comfort zone, which usually means on Sundays we go to church, we pay our dues to God, probably once or twice a month we'll attend a little Bible study group, but for the rest we just go along our well-trodden, secure paths. This is not only a problem of Christianity, this is a human condition. And the one thing that I noticed about all effective leaders, they have a sense of urgency, all leaders. And I could advise people to read the brilliant book of John Cotter, A Sense of Urgency. So he said this is the one thing that distinguishes excellent leaders from average leaders. So an urgent leader will always sort of like turn his situation into a burning platform. It will never, the moment people start getting happy and falling asleep in their comfort zones, a true leader would make it very uncomfortable. It's like Moses. The moment they put up their tents, the leader would say it's time to move. And as soon as they start moving and they start getting happy on the road, he will say it's time to stop. So a good leader, and you will find this in any study on leadership, good leaders are always a bit uncomfortable. They're unpredictable. Although they create safety in terms of their knowledge, a good leader, a good Christian leader, will always tell Christians this is not the way to go. So they will assist people to hand out to start new ministries. They will assist them to apply their gifts, to read their culture. So I think that any good leader will in a non-Christian context or in a Christian context, will sort of like start to teach his church and to accompany his church, to get to know their society, their environment, to start little projects. I know one guy in South Africa where I live, where he just takes the people into city centers, which are quite dangerous places. And they would just go there and he would tell them, trust the Lord and just observe what you're seeing around you. And then he starts interacting with some of the people on the streets. I know another leader who started the church right in the middle of one of the big cities, where they would just print a page of the Bible, a few of them. They would sit on the grass, pack out food around them, and they would just start doing Bible studies. And people would join and join and join, and eventually it turned into a movement. Because one leader read context and realized people need food and they need God. So they did it in a very clear, intentional way. So what I would like to stress is good leaders create urgency, and good leaders are highly intentional of impacting on the society where God placed them. The term urgency should not be confused with hurriedness. We usually think urgency is synonymous or the same as hurriedness. Hurriedness is just running around, being busy. So most people are just hurried. And hurried people have anxiety problems, they're unhappy, they're just running around from morning to night. They just drive around in the traffic and they don't achieve much. On the other hand, to be in the other position is to do every day what God has called you to do. I remember the comedian Seinfeld said that every day he writes a few lines of humor. So to me, this is the right kind of life. This is not hurried, but this is urgent. So every single day I do what God has called me to do. This is a good leader. So every single day I build up people, I pray for people. If it's my calling to write, I write. So it's not about doing all the things, it's about doing the right things. A good leader is urgent about doing the right things. Other people just do things. A leader knows this is my calling and I'm going to do this. If I have to write, I'm going to write. If I have to teach, I'm going to teach. And usually they have all the time in the world. So urgent people have time because they know what their calling is. They're not trying to be all things to all people. A good leader knows the difference between, it's not good and bad, it's good to great. So the enemy of good is great. Great people do less, but they do it more effectively and more urgently. Average people just do great things. And I think we can do many great things, many good things for God. The call is to find the 2 or 3 good things. For that I need a sense of urgency, and that's good leadership. Spiritual gifts. Paul is very clear on spiritual gifts as firstly, God is the source. God gives spiritual gifts, the Holy Spirit, the Father and the Son. We know in Romans 12 that Paul would also refer to leadership as one of the gifts. Well, leadership as taking care of others, directing others, assisting others in serving Christ. But I think this does not imply that if I don't have a certain gift that I cannot do what God has called me to do. There is a clear gift of, say for instance, of being a teacher, but if that doesn't mean that I don't have the responsibility also to share the gospel. Some people with a gift do it easier. So the great responsibility of a leader is to help people discern the gifts. So if somebody has the gift of teaching, a good leader, as Paul tells us in Ephesians 4, will build up this person. Teach this person God's instruction book. In other words, now you should use this gift to build up others, to glorify God, to grow the church. And a leader should also discern when somebody is misusing a gift to just glorify him or herself, then it's the responsibility of the leader to interact with that person, to tell that person this is not how gifts work in the church. So to Paul, the mere fact of having a gift is less important than the right use of a gift. This is what he tells us, that people should stop using their spiritual gifts if they misuse it. So this is part of the responsibility of leaders, to assist people to use their gifts wisely, responsibly, and to the glory of God, and to build up others in their faith. I think in church usually we created the idea if you're young, you have to be educated, and if you're old, you have to be taken care of. So usually we have youth pastors and we have pastors for the elderly. Interestingly enough, when the Holy Spirit is poured out in Acts 2, we hear that the old people, they will dream dreams, and the young people will see visions. So the exact groups that we always target to do ministry to them, they are the people that will minister. So we've gotten scripture wrong. So old people, older people, they're still filled with the Spirit. So in the New Testament, there is no age actually. You will see that whereas in the Old Testament we'll have quite a number of references to age, in the New Testament it's about 2 or 3 in the end. So when the Spirit is present, age is relative. And at the same time we know that children are more important than grown-ups according to Jesus. He's on record time and time again. Matthew 18, you can read all the texts. Mark 9, Mark 10, Luke 24. Jesus says the most important, the greatest, is the smallest and little children. So, but that does not mean that we should not be sensitive to various generations and generation gaps. We know nowadays good leaders will read, and so therefore they will know that the generation gaps are shrinking everywhere. There's even generation gaps between people in the 50s and people in the 60s. It's not just young versus old. It's now old versus older, and not so old versus not too young. So there's all kinds of generation gaps. And a wise leader should take cognizance of this, but the church is one big family, and wise leadership is to sort out how to apply that in one's own context. I think as a Christian leader, the most important facet is to model the life of Christ. In a nutshell, to me, Paul's remark in Philippians 1 verse 21, for me to live is Christ. The leader should urgently, fervently strive to live according to this principle, and at the same time to build up other believers in the most holy faith to embrace this amazing principle. For us to live is Christ. I think Paul helps me. What must I learn from Jesus? Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. So in 1 Corinthians 4. So I would say, if I want to follow Christ, Philippians 2 verse 5 to 11 would be my infographic, would be my text. Paul says, Jesus, who was in the form of God, sacrificed himself by becoming a doulos, a slave. He sacrificed himself even more by dying on the cross. And therefore God exalted him. So if I follow Christ, this will be my route. Death on earth and life in the next world.